Had a telephone call on Wednesday from one of the young people in my church that I served in Atlanta. We found out that he's now 69 years old. And he said, we're in New Orleans to see the World War II Museum and would give anything to have a chance to see you all. We're so close. And I thought to myself, well, I don't feel well, and I've got lots of doctor's appointments, et cetera, and all. And I said, maybe we could do that sometime. And woke up the next morning and looked at the calendar, and it was all clear. So I took a deep breath and stuck my head into Anthony's room, knocked on the door, and stuck my head in, and I said, son, you want some coffee and beignets this afternoon? He didn't answer. But when I walked across the hall, he was coming down the hall with his suitcase. We went to New Orleans to have supper with someone we loved a long time ago and have continued to love even until now. And it was very special indeed. On the way back, I said, well, why don't we take just a couple of minutes and go out to the places where years ago we used to live. And the last time we had visited after Katrina, there was nothing at all except the grass and a few turned over bricks. But trying to find the house, we kept on running into dead-end streets. One of the worst things in the world is to be certain that you know exactly how to get to some place that you can't get to that way. Listen to me, because that'll preach. You're real certain that you get to a place that you can't get to that way. And we finally, did find 120 Ringgold, and there's a new house there. And it was very special to sort of be able to be there. Dead-end streets, dungeon, dark valleys. Ever been there? Know what it feels like? Know what it is like? The good news is that we have a God who cares about that kind of thing and addresses those kinds of issues along the way. This is Transfiguration Sunday. And Jesus is up on the mountain with a few of his crew, and all of a sudden he's changed and he hears, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Do you realize that the meaning of the Transfiguration is an affirmation of Jesus, but an equal affirmation of each and every one of you, of each and every one of us? If there were anything that the eternal God would want you to hear, is that you too are my most beloved. And that's important. My Uncle Chester was wise in many things and not too wise in others. He took a 13-gauge shotgun that he got from a Frenchman and cut it down so he could shoot more geese with one shot. My daddy said to him, Chester, what about the recoil? He said, man, I can take care of that. And my daddy said, show me. So not long after that, Uncle Chester brought us to his house, to his Piro. He had built an A-frame on the Piro, mounted the gun on the A-frame, and said, see? So we went hunting 2 or 3 weeks later, maybe a month. And Uncle Chester was over there because he would say, you never shoot no duck in the air. You only get one like that. You shoot them on the ground. You get 4 or 5 like that. And so he pushed his Piro back into this little marshy area, and Dad and I were probably maybe a half a mile away, and we had a blind and all. And the sun was beginning to rise, and the night was beginning to leave. And we knew that Uncle Chet was over there. But all of a sudden we heard, bam, bam. And then this is the revised version, hot damn. That was hot. Okay. And then the Piro came shooting out of the marsh. This is true. My daddy said, we have got to go now. And so we jumped into our little skiff with a 5-horsepower Evinrude motor, and we ran over there, and the whole time we were just saying, oh, Lord, he's dead, And when we got there, we were looking right through the end of the marsh, and there he was in the mud up to here with his hip boots on, in the marsh. And Daddy said, you need some help? And he said, what you think? And Daddy said, well, let me see if we can get a little closer. So we got the skiff a little closer. And Daddy put his arm out like this. Daddy was standing just like this, put his arm out. And Daddy tried to pull him. Uncle Chet put his arm up, and he tried to pull him, and he wouldn't come. And Daddy said, you got to get out of the hip boots. He said, I ain't getting out of them hip boots. I just bought them things. Huh? And Daddy said, you want to live, you got to get out of the hip. Okay. So he pushed him up. At that time, I remember Uncle Chester coming out of the mud and into the boat. But when I remembered that thing, I thought, my God, that's what grace is. I'm sinking in the mud, and the hand comes out in my direction and rescues me. We can be rescued from fear and anxiety, you know. God does that kind of thing. Right now, I'm having a little fear and anxiety. People say, you don't do that. You're a preacher. You're one of them older Christians. Hey, I'm scared. It's not bad. I can handle it. But I went the other day to my doctor with a strange fear. We're being sent out to MD Anderson, going on the 17th, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I just love him, the 3 doctors that take care of us. And so we prayed, God, help us to handle this thing. Well, when he came in, he sat down and he said, hey, I guess you're going out to Anderson, right? He said, let's check you out, make sure everything's as good as it can be. And so we did all that stuff. You don't want to hear about it. But then he said, Anthony, come over here. Anthony said, sir, come over here, he said. I want you on the left side of your dad. And he came over and got on the right side. And he said, now let's pray. And he said, God, use the skills of those of us in the profession, but do what you can do that we can't. He said, I'm just going to pray that you take this thing away. And I got rescued. And honest to goodness, honest to God, I'm not the least bit afraid now to do what we have to do. That's not my story. That's our story. Because ours is the God of rescue. The God that rescues us from sin and selfishness. So many times we don't even recognize it. It's interesting, isn't it, when a psychiatrist has to write a book entitled, Whatever Happened to Sin? Because we have sinned, all of us, and fallen short of the glory of God. And the interesting thing about that is we often rack up sin as those things we do or don't do, when in fact falling short of the glory of God will work real well. Not being everything we could have been, not being everything we should have been, not everything we might have been. Hey, listen, not everything we still can be. God's not done with us yet. And the wonder of it is I see Dad's hand and Uncle Chet's hand getting together. Incidentally, when we got back in the boat and he changed clothes and was sitting there at the pot-bellied stove smoking his pipe, he said to my daddy, he said, Denny? My dad said, what? He said, I think you're right about that recoil. I know you all have figured it out, but he pulled the back trigger by accident. And the thrust of the recoil kicked the boat out and tipped. He literally flipped over into the water. But God can save us from selfishness too. So many times we don't even think about the fact that we're being selfish. But you know, it doesn't take long to find out whether or not you're living a selfish life, because you're not going to be happy selfish. All of a sudden you start doing a little something for somebody else and you feel better. I remember Yul Brynner saying he died with some kind of a terrible bone cancer. And he said, when I'd get out and ride a horse in a movie, when I was as sick as could be, all of a sudden I could deal with my pain in a different way. Sitting there with other actors, deal with my pain. And God can rescue us from addictions too. There are a lot of us in this room that know about that. You know the problem with addiction? We don't have a problem. That's the problem with addiction. I can handle it. I do it exactly like I should, not hurting anybody but myself. Folks, that is bunk, pure bunk. If we're lost in an addiction, we create barriers and separations between ourselves and the people we love and the people that love us back. But God can deal with that. God's got any number of ways to deal with the reality of addiction. We went to Arno's for supper in New Orleans. I'm from New Orleans. I always heard about it. I never got a chance to go there, And so we had a nice little supper. And on the way out, when we were hugging each other goodbye, just that brief encounter, and getting ready to leave, Morris said to me, "This was absolutely wonderful. And I cannot tell you, I cannot believe that you guys drove 6 hours to have supper with us." And I said, "We had fun." And he said, "Yeah, but I had fun too." Folks, that's what love does. It goes beyond itself, takes a little extra time and a little extra effort to be able to be there for somebody else, to be able to make a little difference or a lot of difference to that person. I don't even know if he'd be pleased with me telling you this, but this particular guy, his first name is Morris, is the guy that I stayed with when I was in Atlanta for a time. He had a problem. Rich kids, and he was one, when they buy firecrackers, they get the real thing. And so he stuck a firecracker in somebody's mailbox to see what would happen. And so he blew up the federal judge's mailbox. It's true. I mean, it just sort of fell apart. So they said, if you can get a mentor of some kind to stay with him for a few weeks, we'll kind of excuse this thing. So I stayed with him, and it was the week of his senior graduation from high school. Stay with me on this. And he came in. His daddy, incidentally, for graduation, gave him a Mercedes convertible coupe. And about 10 minutes after 12, he came in. They were in the hall. I was in the room, and I was not sleeping yet. And he and his daddy were talking, and the dad said, "Morris, I didn't expect you in so early." He said, "Well, we had fun, but I was ready to leave." And the daddy said, "Well, okay, have a good night." And he said, "Daddy, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Yeah." He said, "I'm 18 years old. I've gone every place I want to go. I've done everything that I want to do. I just wondered if you could give me a reason to get up in the morning." God delivers us from a life without meaning and without value into a life that's so filled with opportunity that you can hardly believe it. And the truth is that you could never keep up with it. And the wonder of it is that it's so good and so joyous and so miraculous. I'm almost done. But it's interesting how miracles happen. This is very personal, and forgive me. But one of the really bad things that's happening now, and 5 doctors don't have any idea why, is when I take one bite of anything, I have a pain that I couldn't even describe to you. I do crazy things like shake my feet. I look like I'm having a seizure or something. Doesn't last long. Just lasts for a little while. And so we're taking communion. In just a minute, we're going to do it again. And it's my turn to take communion, and I'm taking it thinking, I'm standing here holding hands with these people, and I'm going to act like an idiot, And I put that thing in my mouth, and there was no pain. None. It might hurt later, but it didn't hurt then. What I'm trying to say to you is that you're looking for the miraculous all over the place, and there's nothing that's not miraculous. There's nothing that is at all that's not all filled with the presence and the power and the person of the living God. The God who takes us out of dead-end streets and dark dungeon places and puts us on high and exalted and expecting places. The God who is filled with the positive and done with the negative.